Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this kind of blustery Wednesday afternoon in New York City. Not sure where the weather is if you're not in New York. My name is Lindsay Working. I'm the acting president with American Composers Orchestra, and I'm so excited to welcome you to the first event in our new series called Composer to Composer Talks. We really miss seeing everyone in the concert hall and being able to be together to discover new works. But since we can't do that, we thought we'd bring you these conversations and really dive into depth into specific works with composers who wrote them and composers who have close relationships with them. I want to thank all of the people who have made this event possible. First, the artists, so George Lewis, Courtney Bryan, Damon Holzborn, and ACO's artistic director, Derek Bermel, for making the time to do this with us. I also want to thank ACO's staff and board. As many arts organizations are right now, there's a lot of ongoing change and big challenges, but I'm really, pleased with all the work that everyone's doing and can't express my gratitude enough. I'd also like to thank Jensen Artists and Christina Jensen for helping us produce this series. If you'd like to stay in touch with us, I encourage you to sign up for our email list. There'll be a link in the chat. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Derek and the rest of the artist panel to get us going.
Thanks so much, Lindsay.
Yeah.
And this is very exciting today. We're going to have George Lewis along with Courtney Bryan and Damon Holzborn. They're going to be discussing George Lewis's epic work, his Virtual Concerto for piano and orchestra, which was commissioned and premiered by the ACO, American Composers Orchestra, in 2004 at Carnegie Hall. So we're very excited to feature this work, and I want to welcome all of you out there who are listening in whatever continent you're in. Please write in questions or things you'd like to discuss or reactions in the chat. If you go to the chat section on this page, you can write in your questions and we'll try to get to them as we go. So I'd like to invite George, Courtney, and Damon now.
Hi, how's everybody doing?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So George, you're joining us from Berlin, is it?
Yes, I'm in the small office. Well, actually, it's a pretty big office, really, in the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin. This is an Institute for Advanced Study. I'm a fellow for the year with about 30 other people.
Wow. And you have great wallpaper there, I noticed.
Oh, yeah. I try to keep that, on the good side there, but so people can see what part 3 is like, and I suppose you'll be hearing that pretty soon.
Yes, we've got the score right behind you. So we'll be looking for that. And we've got Courtney Bryan. You're joining us from where?
From New Orleans.
New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where you're teaching?
Yeah, I'm teaching at Tulane.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just mentioning we just spent yesterday discussing Voyager, which was very exciting.
Oh,
terrific. All right. Well, I hope some of those maybe some of your students will be joining us too.
Mm-hmm.
The generations upon generations. And we have Damon Holzborn joining us from not too far from me, right?
Yep. Yeah, in Brooklyn, New York.
What part of Brooklyn are you? Let's get down to
Ditmas Park. So.
Right, exactly. So he's about a few blocks from me, so there should be very little latency there. So how do you all know each other? Let's just get the details.
Should I start? Because I'm the oldest. I met Damon in what year did we meet, Damon? At UCSB?
Probably
when I was teaching
1992,
there?
probably. Yeah, it's probably 1992.
Yeah, you were an undergraduate student, and we started to work on improvisation strategies.
Right.
And you were doing, electronics and playing the guitar and doing all kinds of things, plus other things I probably don't know about. So, and you were a member of a collective called Tremor Flora.
Yeah, after school, but yes, and in San Diego we started a musicians collective called Tremor Flora.
It was pretty influential. I mean, you guys were doing cross-border collaborations with artists in Tijuana, including the Nortec Collective. I remember that concert very well.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, we had before, gosh, I can't remember how many years we did a festival in addition to regular concerts that we did in various venues around the city.
And what about Courtney?
Well, once again, I'll start with Courtney. Well, I should finish with Damon because that was when we met. And then Damon has his doctoral degree, Dr. Damon Holzborn, from Columbia, and he was my student, loosely called. Although I'm one of these people, like, so-called teachers and so-called students. I'm not really into that too much. And so I was wondering, what am I actually teaching anyone, if anything? And then Damon, Courtney, and then Courtney was also subjected to this a little later, and she also is a DMA graduate of Columbia as well in our composition program. But I mean, Courtney, what you could? I mean, when did that happen?
Sure. Yeah, I do want to add, like, there was when I met George. There's before I met George, how I met him without saying hello, but I was in the audience. So, so I met George when I got into Columbia University. I remember being invited to a Columbia Composers concert, so I went there. And then after the concert, George invited me to go hear Anthony Braxton at the Iridium. And so that's also when I met Mia Masaoka, and also when I met Vijay Iyer. I remember that day very well.
Wow.
But also beforehand, at Oberlin Conservatory, when I was a student undergrad, I remember that you came, George, you came and did a performance, a masterclass in a performance when Logan was there at the time. And so it was with the Oberlin Jazz Ensemble. And then I remember going to hear this concert in the chapel. And then also there were all these sounds coming. I didn't know where they were coming from. And that was Voyager. So actually I met you, I heard you first, and it was with Voyager, with the student ensemble. So that was the preview.
I didn't realize that we could have met way back then.
I know, and I was being shy, Courtney, so I got to meet you later, though, which is really
many
great.
crossings.
Yeah.
Wow. George, I met you in Amsterdam many years before that. You probably don't remember because you had just played a gig, so you were, you were in that zone.
I remember that. Well, this would have been dare we go back that far? That would have been.
Let's not go back that far.
Yeah, right. We don't want to tell anybody how old we are.
But in any case, Damon, in fact, has a real history with this piece. So can you let's get into it? I mean, they have some questions for you, so I'm going to just listen and enjoy. But I just want to make sure that people put their questions into the chat and let us know what you're thinking. And don't let us know everything you're thinking, but just let us know the important things and the important questions that you might have for either George Lewis, Courtney Bryan, or Damon Holzborn. And so let's get going talking about Voyager.
Okay, great. So before we begin talking about Virtual Concerto, why don't we talk a little bit about Voyager? So George, can you start us off by give us a little background on what Voyager is?
Oh, what is Voyager? My goodness, is it a program? Is it an environment? Basically, I think of it as an improvising computer program. Now, you could also think of it as a composing computer program, since it doesn't know the difference. Its job is to create music, number one, and number two, to interact with its environment. So if someone is playing music with Voyager, Voyager turns its attention to whatever or whoever is playing the music. It doesn't, and it tends to be a little bit, we just had a Voyager concert the other day, on Saturday here in the Haus der Kultur in der Welt in Berlin with great pianist Magda Mayas. And Magda has a very sort of wonderfully intricate style, and Voyager sort of picked that up and started doing wonderful things with it. But it's also designed to do things like push back, resist, not always just go along. It's not an echo machine. And as I told Magda, if you don't feel like playing, just go off stage and the machine will know that and will take over. So it's quite independent like that. And so that's basically what it is. The first version of it was in 1987, which is quite a long time ago. And before that, there was a piece that was made at IRCOM, which was premiered in 1984 called Rainbow Family, which is also sort of a virtual orchestra kind of thing. And actually, that's come out as a recording now on Carrier Records. So that's very interesting to sort of see that. These two pieces are sort of odd, odd ducks in the history of experimental electronic music. I mean, this piece hasn't been heard practically since its premiere by anybody except maybe me and a few friends. And it's the same with Rainbow Family before. You know, it's now these things are starting to come out, and people are realizing that very odd things happened in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s.
Okay, great. So let's bring it to Virtual Concerto then. So how does the idea for the piece developed between you and ACO? Back in.
Oh yeah, ACO had an initiative. Maybe they still have it. It's called Improvise, and to get the orchestra to sort of be involved in improvisation, I wrote an article called "Improvisation in the Orchestra" to kind of support that. It got published in, I think it was Contemporary Music Review, and they wanted to have a piece in which the orchestra would have an improvising role. And so we went back and forth about that, and then someone said, well, maybe you could be the improviser. I said, well, I don't really want to do that because I heard stories, you know how it is, people playing in their own piece. It's hard, right? I mean, Derek, you might have done that. It's difficult, right? But you feel like, you're thinking that the third horn is a little flat, so you, and then like, what do I do, And then you're trying to play and you're thinking, oh, it's not working out or whatever. So I didn't want to go there. But then I said, well, look, I know someone or something that could play a solo part. And, they heard the story about how we would have Voyager play the piano, and they went for that. And so that's how the piece sort of got rolling,
Voyager at the time wasn't actually a piano player yet. What had you worked with the disc claviers before?
Voyager, as you know, was an orchestra piece. It was a virtual orchestra piece. It had 64 instruments. And unlike real orchestras, everybody could play every instrument. Each voice has its MIDI and all that. So you could have 64 flutes or 64 different instruments, and there was this elaborate orchestration scheme. And it was also microtonal. So you could have 64 different versions of, Parse 43-tone scale, within half an octave. You could really do incredible timbral things. And but then this was supposed to be a piano soloist. So we had to make a pianist. We had to create a pianist. So Damon and I created this pianist. And the pianist that you're hearing on the Virtual Concerto is the product of, you said it didn't take that long, right?
Yeah, I did recently, in a previous conversation, did some digging in my email and determined it took almost exactly 2 months from the moment you gave me the first lines of pseudocode to the moment we were sitting on stage at Carnegie Hall. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's another strange thing. Damon translated the entire program, everything I wrote, like it was probably if I printed out the book once, it was 120 pages of programming code. And he translated it all into Max MSP, including the bits that didn't work, which we found out some of those bits actually did work. I just didn't think they would work. But in any event, he translated all that, and then we had to sort of figure out how to cut 64 voices down to what turned out to be 6 little fingers. And of course, because it's the piano, there's no microtonality, so that went away. And then the Yamaha Artist Services, they sent a disc clavier to my house in San Diego. And we would sit around. I'd take daily walks. I loved living in San Diego. It was like living in a park. I'd take a walk to this, or we'd take a walk to this coffee shop and sit around and talking about stuff and arguing about how it should go and everything. See, Damon Holzborn is the only person who knows how Voyager works. So this is it. And so when we start talking about it, it gets to be like a form of twin speak. It's like idiolalia. Passing stuff back and forth. Nobody else knows what we're talking about. Well, you guys are nuts, right? But anyway,
can we hear a little of it now? I mean, maybe we could hear a little excerpt.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry for the sirens. That's how it's going on in Brooklyn. But let's hear a little bit of it, and maybe we'll have some reactions to it.
And now the soloist comes in. No.
I have a few questions that I'll make into one general question. So with Virtual Concerto, I was wondering if you could share more about the process, both your process composing the piece and then also the process of rehearsal. So in creation, just more about like how you, the inspiration for the musical material and also some of the things that are unique to having Piano Voyager as a soloist. And then with the rehearsal, I was curious about like the process working with the conductor's experience, working with a computer soloist, and also anything that you want to share about the performers and their experience of working with your guidelines for orchestral improvisation.
Well, that's a lot of questions. So I'm going to try so I'm going to try to work on that. I mean, we talked a little bit about constructing the player, and what you heard there was that we had a series of cues in the piece, and I think it was Damon, was you and Jeffrey Milarski, the percussionist and conductor, were backstage.
Actually, on stage.
On stage. Oh, you were on stage. I couldn't see you. I was in the audience. I couldn't see you. You were on stage?
Anyway, way stage right. Just yeah.
And you had two computers ready to go in case one of them packed up and stopped working. But the thing is, there's a series of cues. So what you heard at one point was that you heard this sort of idée fixe that gets getting tossed around, da 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 da, and then that would go on. That went on through the entire first movement. And so what would happen is you'd have a cue, and then when the piano came in first, it had this sort of like behavior set. That's what I call it. Voyager operates on behavior sets. So a behavior set would be a set of parameters, and then you fill in what those parameters do. There'll be like 30 parameters, and the simple stuff like pitch and duration, and like whether notes are long or short, and all kinds of stuff like that. And then it would work with that behavior set for about 20 seconds. Then it would go off on its own, and it would make up its own behavior set. So there'd always be this initial behavior set. So when you heard like the first one, after the pianist came and you heard like that was a composed behavior set, which the computer played according to that behavior set. But what it played was not written out. It was just playing according to the behavior set. And then the behavior set would expire and then was free to do what it wanted. So that was the idea, to have that go on at all times. Now the rehearsals, I don't remember everything you did, but if it's, I probably missed a couple things. The rehearsals actually were pretty congenial. I mean, Stephen Sloan was great. I mean, like he, you know, it was a new thing for everybody. And we decided to just let the machine play for a while, just so that people could get used to what it sounded like. And I got some compliments on the playing of the thing. And part of the reason was because I'd spent a lot of time, you know, later I read this wonderful essay by Chris Frith and Uta Frith, two neuroscientists that I was on a residency with in the 90s in Copenhagen. And they were talking about something about how it was like how people know that you're of biological provenance or not. And so they call it public information. In other words, when you move or when you do things, people can tell you're not a robot, you're like a person, or you're not, and what kind of person you are. And babies can tell a lot about what you want and what your desires are by watching your gestures and what you do. So I have always said that it also applies to sound. And so even previous versions of Voyager, you know, they sounded pretty good for a while, and then all of a sudden they would go out and do something crazy. I said, well, what are you doing? You know, so it would just do, and at that point people would say, oh, it's random, you know. So I figured out how to give it these biorhythms so that everything, Voyager used to be like, do this, then do that, then do the other. But now Voyager was like, there are 8 different biorhythms, they all intersect, and so there's no point at which anything is stable, everything is in motion. So that makes it sound more like it's just a person doing something. It's even more like that now than it was before. And so you want it to sound like it's a person because that's generally who people want to play with, is other people. And so if it sounds like some weird thing, I mean, they're happy to do it, or maybe they're not happy to do it. But I was pleased to find out that people didn't mind playing with it. It wasn't annoying them or, you know, sounding like a dumb machine or something.
You know, there were a couple of questions that came in that were interesting. One was a question about how did you know what how did you decide what the orchestra would do ahead of time, knowing that Voyager would be improvising along with it. And the other question was just something that you said earlier, describing nuances between Voyager as improviser, composer, the environment, all these things together. How did you fit all that together?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I mean, I wrote the 90% of the piece is written out. Okay, so basically, it responded differently to each rehearsal. It responded differently, and at the performance, it responded differently. So it was kind of experimental in that sense. You sort of knew some of what was going to happen, because Voyager actually had a personality and so on. So you knew it has its own direction as a player. So, but in terms of what it was going to respond, there's one point in the second movement where I'll be able to show you how that works. Some surprising things happened that weren't programmed, but somehow worked out. What was the second thing, Derek? It was about what?
Well, just about this kind of confluence of improviser, composer, and the environment in which things are happening. Maybe creating some, the tension that makes the piece come alive.
Yeah. That's an interesting, we might want to, do you have time? We might want to, I think that's a question that would be easier to talk about in the second section. So
let's do it.
But do you want to, did we answer your question, Courtney, that you wanted to get into?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks.
Courtney had the rapid fire questions.
Very good questions. Great questions.
They were great questions.
Also, the chat room questions are also great.
Yes, and please continue. Those of you listening to, we have George Lewis here, of course, discussing his virtual concerto from 2004, commissioned from the American Composers Orchestra, performed and premiered at Carnegie Hall. We have Courtney Bryan, composer from down in New Orleans, born in New Orleans, now returned to New Orleans after a long sojourn in
a prophet in her hometown.
Oh,
can you believe it?
Prophet in her hometown.
All
yes,
right.
There you go. And we have Damon Holzborn, who's here from Brooklyn, exotic Brooklyn. Ditmas Park. So let's hear the second excerpt of this virtual concerto.
Okay, now they're kind of improvising. But it's not, they're improvising according to a grid. I don't know if we have that. Okay, we're back in the piece now. Oh, the computer is improvising, but we're back in the piece. This is a quote from a different piece. Jacob Greenberg will recognize it, and Sarah Cahill. It's called Endless Shout. Dedicated to Ruhal, Richard Abrams.
Wow. I mean, I just wonder, what happens when they want an encore from the soloist after.
Oh, that's easy.
After
the problem is getting the
that's
thing
easy,
to stop.
right?
That's what I'm working on now.
Well, we're listening to George Lewis, George Lewis's concerto, his virtual concerto for piano and orchestra, which was premiered by the American Composers Orchestra in 2004. We're here with Courtney Bryan, composers Courtney Bryan and Damon Holzborn, who are asking some questions of George. And we have people who are writing in from all over the place, from South Dakota, from Colorado, from Vermont, from Columbus, Ohio, LA, Santa Fe, and even exotic places like the West Village and Oslo as well. I saw, and there's a lot of interesting questions coming in. Please keep your questions coming. This is a piece I think should be played all over the world. I don't understand what everyone's waiting for, because to me this is a revolutionary piece. I remember hearing the premiere. Someone asked if we could throw up the map of the Voyager. Some of the maps that Courtney, you had furnished us with, I believe.
Oh, that would be great. If we could see that, that would explain a lot.
Yeah.
Of what was going on in the improvisation. Yeah, that's a part of it. And can you stick with just that one bit? Thanks. So basically, everybody had this, but I did things. The problem, you have like 100 people up there. If you say to all of them, just go for it, it's not going to be that organized and it won't work out very well. So you have to figure out it's like time sharing. So what you do is you ask people to do a task, and so the task might be solely, and so now can you scroll down and you can see the explanations. I don't know if people can read this, but the instruction set, okay, that's great. And you see that, and it gives an explanation for what each of those things means. And actually, we ended up doing it so that the section leaders, the principal player, would decide when each section would play, rather than having people, like 100 people, make individual decisions. Now, you could have that, but I didn't know how to make that happen very well at the time, because it's hard to get these things to work. So what was nice about the ACO experience was that we were able to experiment with this within the limitations of not having so much time to rehearse. And so we had to figure out how to get these experimentations to work. So the issue is one of timing. The original idea was that if you played a box for, let's say, 15 seconds, you would stop playing for 4 times that amount. And so we were looking for a combination of textures that would emerge without being too thick or too thin all the time. So it ended up with about 60, 70, 80, 90 people. You wanted to have it be like, if you played for 30 seconds, you were out for 3 minutes, which meant that most people never played more than one of their boxes. So they just chose that one. I mean, this actual grid could be a completely different piece that goes on for another 15 or 20 minutes. So that's how we did that. And other pieces, this is based on other pieces I've done, Shadowgraph 5. It's become a kind of a technique that I use now for a lot of different pieces. And this was an early version of it. I hope that helps. Yeah.
I had a question, and this is actually consolidating some questions from my students. At Tulane, we were, yesterday we had a chance to listen to Voyager, from Voyager from the 90s, as well as recent performances with other pianists like Jerry Allen, Jason Moran, and Vijay Iyer. So there was a listening, but also they read your piece, Too Many Notes, Computers, Complexity and Culture in Voyager, and Paul Steinbeck's George Lewis Voyager. And earlier this semester, they read an excerpt from Power Stronger Than Itself, and especially zeroing in on the beginning of AACM and discussions about original music. So a lot of things came up about technology, but also culture and different inspirations. So now I'm going to narrow it into a question. What is the influence of the musical practices of the AACM on your creation of Voyager, and also maybe, or even just with this piece in particular?
Well, you mentioned Paul Steinbeck, and he kind of figured it out pretty well. I mean, it's all about multi-instrumentalism. When I was in high school, I went to see the art ensemble, and it scared me so much I passed out. I mean, they had like 200, 500 instruments on the stage, and it wasn't on the stage. It was in this common room at the University of Chicago. And like, you're sitting right up in Joseph Jarman's face, and he's like, naked to the waist, and everybody had this face paint, and there was like 2,000 instruments up there. It sounded like a huge orchestra. So that's basically it with Voyager. The old Voyager, the one that was not the pianist, the virtual orchestra, was that you wanted maximum diversity, but then you had to manage that diversity. So the ASM, of course, a huge influence. And the part we heard about, that second part, the first part with the ratchet and all that, I mean, that's what the art ensemble would do. They'd have these ratchets and weird bells and stuff. For all I know, that might have been my direct transcription from Roscoe Mitchell's piece, The Maze, for a percussionist. There's a lot of homages to different stuff in Virtual Concerto. So yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so you mentioned Rainbow Family a couple times, and so you've been doing work that is interactive computer programs for much long predating Voyager. So can you talk about a little bit about what the things that distinguish Voyager from like pre-Voyager? Like what is it that the Voyager changed or brought? What was it that's new in Voyager, what changed?
Yeah, it's hard to say because Voyager is still kind of going. I mean, '87 was when it started. Mass College of Art, they invited me in to do 2 things: to give a Voyager concert and be on Christian Marclay's MFA committee. So that's what I was there. So I remember Voyager because that was the circumstances of it. So I don't know, Christian probably heard the premiere as well. So, but in any event, the idea was to have, let me put it this way. Previous systems operated on the basis, it was supposed to be multi-timbral and multi-rhythmic. So you had many different rhythms going at the same time that you could have that. And that was an idea that came from Joel Ryan when we built the first version of Voyager at Stein in Amsterdam. And Joel had a system that he had made where you heard these incredible things you didn't know where they came from. And he started talking about having multiple clocks and all that. I said, well, we could do that. That's something we could do. So that architecture is still Voyager today. You know, the idea of being able to group people, group different players all together, but to have the possibility of having multiple rhythms go on at the same time. And in fact, a lot of what you're hearing in Voyager, when you hear like someone going boom, that's actually could be like 20 different rhythms going, but it sounds like just one gesture. So it's an odd way of thinking about it. But that's what really differentiated it from the earlier programs, really, was that the flexibility of rhythm was the most important factor. And then in those days, the microtonality, which was pretty important, but it wasn't systematic microtonality. I was interested in the timbral aspect of microtonality. So you could have, like, if there are 64 instruments, you could have 64 different scales in 64 different transpositions. So, and sometimes that would sound like nuts and sometimes would be cool.
Well, so rather than using the term interactive, you perhaps more accurately can call Voyager an improvising computer program. And the distinction between these ideas can sometimes be a point of confusion on a performer's first meeting with Voyager. Can you discuss a little bit about what goes into a successful engagement with Voyager from the standpoint of somebody who, the performer, who's improvising with Voyager?
Well, that's interesting because I just had that experience with Magda Myers, who was just brilliant, you know, and also with Jerry Allen or many other people. I remember, because often people come to it with the idea that because it's a computer, you should do something special or different, or that you should, you know, try to coddle it in some way, or maybe you should not play certain things you feel like playing. And I just tell people to play whatever they want and do what you would normally do with anybody else. And then they start doing that. And generally they don't have any problem. When problems come, generally it's when they feel that they should be in charge, you know, like it's a machine, and so I'm the person, and so naturally I'm the person that's in charge of it. So there's a wonderful thing that Jerry said years ago, and we did a lecture in 2011, and someone asked if it was certainly, someone said, well, of course it was not predictable like it would be with a person. She said, well, no, I don't think I could say that. You know? So it was like she had figured out that it was just about communication, really. And Magda, that was her thing, it was just about communication. And I tell it, you can ignore it if you like, because it might ignore you, and you'll hear when it ignores you, because you're an improviser and you can hear these things. So the other thing is, you'll hear more of that in the third part of this thing coming up. But I think that's the basic thing. Maybe to say more than that, I don't know how much time we have. I could go on all day about this thing. But I would say,
can you take us?
What?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Derek. Go ahead, Derek.
Oh, I was just going to say, maybe you can take us through as we listen to the excerpt. You could point out where certain things might be happening that the audience might not be aware of.
Let's try that. Let's do that. We'll play this third part. In this part, this is a long improvisation for the computer. And this is the behavior set that starts it off. It's supposed to be compatible with the background of the orchestra. So that partially answers the question we had a while ago. So right about here, behavior set's over, it's on its own. It's also listening to what the orchestra is doing. Now this is weird, it's following the chord changes. I couldn't believe that. This is a quintet of improvising, the principles of improvising with the computer. That was it.
Wow. There were more questions from various people. Questions about whether you were unhappy ever with any of the improvisational results. I can imagine what your answer will be, but were you unhappy? Was there a way to tweak them? And also just a question about whether you were surprised about the way the machine followed the chord changes. Why did you mention that you might be surprised that it would follow the chord changes?
Well, I mean, it was nice because that's how I knew that it was listening. That was proof that it was, but there's no sort of chord change following subroutine. It was, and also the thing is the way these pitch following algorithms work in those days, especially, they were quite monophonic. And so basically it was probably picking out notes that it heard in a kind of and this happened to be the notes that were being played. So there wasn't, so that worked out. But it's hard to do. And so that was a nice moment of serendipity, something I didn't expect. In terms of being happy or unhappy with it, well, this is the thing about improvisation, because this is as Arnold I. Davidson, the philosopher, says, our improvisation is really a way of life. And he's about to publish a book on that pretty soon. And when you're talking about a way of life, it's like, there was this thing, this computer, this cellular automata thing by John Conway. It's called The Game of Life. And it was like, why they called it The Game of Life is because there were no do-overs. So, the thing was, no do-overs, and that's how it is. So you're improvising, or you decide one day that, you went on a date with somebody and it didn't quite work out, with there no do-overs. Except I did see this wonderful Japanese television show called Time Taxi, where they did let you do a do-over. You got into a taxi, you paid the guy 50,000 yen, and you could do it all over again. But that's only in Japanese TV shows. But other than that, no do-overs. So yeah, if you're unhappy, tough toodles. You have to. But most of the time, you try to make it so that, well, actually, when you're building a machine like this, the problem is that you listen to it for very long periods of time playing. You sit there and listen to it, and then you try to tweak it, and then you tweak it, and then you realize that you got some behavior you liked, but then it made it worse in other times. So at a certain point, you're looking for a medium between most of the time it sounds like what you want, and the thing is, the times when it doesn't sound like what you want, you have to realize that maybe you should listen again and not be so judgmental. And maybe the next time you'll say, oh yeah, this is just what I want. I've had that experience with a lot of people. At first I didn't understand their music, and later I did. Sort of the same thing. You
were mentioning referencing Princeton faculty. So why don't if we move to we have a video of another former Princeton faculty, Courtney Bryan, who's playing using Voyager, right?
Yeah.
Courtney, do you want to say anything about that? About the video?
Yeah, I'll just say that it was really a mind-blowing experience, because I had seen and heard different performances with Voyager and read about it, and I felt very at home with the computer as the computer musician, but didn't get to do it. It was just really a mind-blowing experience, and that's all I'll say about it. I hope to get to do it again.
So let's see that now.
you guys were great. Actually, there are 4 pianos. There are 2 in New York and 2 in Melbourne, Australia, and it was hooked up so that obviously the human pianists could hear each other, and then we had to make it so that the computers could hear what the humans were doing, and so everybody could you could hear everybody else through data or some other means. And this is a thing that Damon got to work using, what was it, OSC, some incredible system. How did you get that to work, Damon? It was like, you're off, you're muted.
We're using OSC through through like UDP sends, just sending it just over the internet through UDP from straight from Mac. So basically just sending MIDI over the internet to each other. And in addition, of course, there was audio going over the internet from the 2 locations as well.
Yeah, a telematic piece that we called it spooky interaction. Sort of like, when Einstein, he called, quantum entanglement. He didn't believe in that. That was, had some problems with it. He called it spooky action at a distance. So this was spooky interaction. So there you go.
Well, I have to say, at ACO, we've been so lucky to have George Lewis as a thought leader, and really helped not only with the improvisation festival, the Improvise festival, but also along with Alvin Singleton and Anthony Davis, but also in the formation of Jazz Composers Orchestra Institute, right, which you led for the first 2 incarnations. And then we were lucky enough to attract some incredible composers like Courtney Bryan to that program. And so just transitioning to your work, Courtney, we just wanted to give people a taste of what you're up to. So do you want to say anything about this composition that we're going to hear a recording, I suppose, from London Sinfonietta?
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, that was such an important institute to be a part of. It really led to, and for me, it just really led to another stage of music and way of thinking about things. After doing that institute and having the reading, I received a commission, my very first commission. It was from American Composers Orchestra, and it was a chance to write this piece, Sanctum, which I remember I had a chance to write for orchestra and recorded sound. So the piece was Sanctum in 2015, which became my response to police brutality. And so that's what the piece originally was, for full orchestra and recorded sound. And just this year, just a few weeks ago, George invited me to be part of a program that you co-curated with London Sinfonietta, which was a Black Lives Matter concert. And so for that, I did a chamber version of the same piece, Sanctum. So this performance, this clip is from the recent chamber premiere of Sanctum with London Sinfonietta.
Great. So we'll get to hear it now with the London Sinfonietta, Sanctum by Courtney Bryan.
That's brilliant. Wow.
Thank you.
You could hear a little bit of New Orleans coming through there in the snare drum. Yeah, very moving piece. I remember that premiere at the Rose Hall at Jazz Lincoln Center with ACO. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
And glad it's being heard again. And Damon, can you? We also have a little slice of something from you. Do you want to introduce this piece?
Sure, thanks. So we're going to play an excerpt of Alternator 1, which is my most recent release. In fact, it was the first work I've made during the pandemic. This was recorded just 2 days into the March lockdown. It is a generative work, but it's generated entirely within the modular synthesizer rather than using computer algorithms. So the compositional process is for me to create a very complex web of interacting modulation so that the piece will be always changing, sometimes very quickly, sometimes very slowly, but always changing. And sort of in the context of this conversation today, we can kind of say it's sort of Voyager's non-interactive, analog, rather noisier, distant cousin, I think. So this excerpt comes from the first of the two pieces. So there's 2 15-minute pieces created using this process, and this is a short excerpt from the first one.
Wow. How is he doing that? How are you doing that, man?
Well, the process is an awful lot like Voyager. You sit and you listen for a while, and you determine what's going on that's terrible, and you try to figure out why it's terrible, and then you keep doing that until it's hopefully not terrible anymore. And
there's so many other questions people have, and I saw there's a question from Eve about Courtney's process, and I saw a nice little shout out from Kerwin Young, who was actually one of the producers of Public Enemy, who also is a wonderful composer of symphonic music, who's actually going to be involved in our next show after this one in a couple weeks, where he'll be interviewing his own teachers, Chen Yi and Joe Long. There's so much to say about the music of George Lewis and how it's impacted people who are working in many, many different ways, and we heard it in this kind of otherworldly work of Damon's, and in the kind of direct appeal to our better natures from Courtney Bryan, and both using electronics and electronic sound and recorded sound in ways stretching the envelope, but always in ways that provoke and sustain. And I mean, I wanted to just ask all of you, do you have anything that you want to say to composers and musicians and performers out there during this difficult time, during the pandemic, about being creative, or about how to reach others in their communities at this time?
Sure, I've been thinking about this. I think it's a time where, well, first of all, creating, I feel like is will keep you going. So like whether you're creating for someone or for yourself, just to keep creating. But also in general with this time, I think it's kind of okay to not force things to be normal or familiar to ways you may have thought before this time. I think it's okay to embrace the fact that that things are different, and to just kind of like to create from where you are right now. I guess that's the main thing, and just to keep creating. But yeah, things are different, and maybe there's opportunities in thinking about things differently.
Yeah, like most people, I assume most of us, I've had difficulty maintaining creativity, productivity during this year. But one thing that I did find helped me is to come up with projects that somehow related to the current moment. And for example, I did created a shared patch game with my friend John O'Brien, which allowed us to share the configuration of our synthesizers back and forth, so that we each make a series of solos, one with the patch that you made, one with the patch that he made. And this allowed us to collaborate asynchronously during a time when face-to-face rehearsals were just not possible. And since I make tools as well as music, I also was able to share the web app I made that allowed us to share these patches and share those with people. So people who have this same synthesizer that we were using, it's the Make Noise No Coast, the synthesizer, they could actually sort of play this game as well. And for me, having projects like that has sort of helped drive me through periods when I otherwise maybe would have had flagging energy, and it just sort of helped to sort of focus in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing everybody told me, people all over the world, they said it was like having a brain fog or something. And so the only way to overcome that was really to get together with as many people as you could over whatever means you could, these digital platforms, and to try to figure out how to involve everyone and to get involved in other kinds of projects. Jennifer Coe did this incredible project where she commissioned all these people and played their pieces, like it was about nine shows of solo performances by her. And things like this help people to survive pandemics. Even though everyone is having a hard time just sort of surviving, really. I mean, for different reasons. And we have to imagine that some people we know might have passed away or got really sick, or maybe are having a hard time right now. So I think that what we're doing now, creativity can help us survive, I think. So we just have to continue to remember that we are creative people.
Well, to three wonderful creative people. Thank you so much for joining us today. Damon Holzborn, I'll see you at the Flatbush Food Co-op, I guess, probably tomorrow or something. Courtney Bryan from New Orleans, thank you so much for joining us. George Lewis, as always, inspiring future generations. Thank you for sharing your virtual concerto with us, both on the wallpaper behind you where the score is. And I hope it's played many more times. It deserves to be played all over the world. And I hope we'll start hearing this piece for all you artistic administrators out there. This is, it's an incredible piece to actually witness live. I mean, as much as it's great to hear, and you hear George talking about it, to see and hear it live. So I hope once the pandemic is over and concerts start to happen again, we'll do that. And for those of you tuning in, please join us again when we do the next one of this series, Composer to Composer. You're going to hear on December 2nd, Kerwin Young discussing works by Joe Long and Chen Yi. And it's actually, this is a work that they wrote together. So this is an especially interesting work. These two great composers, both born in China, now living in Kansas City and Brooklyn too. They got a place here. So please join us December 2nd at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That would be 11 p.m. German time or Oslo. I don't know where people are all over the place. So Eastern Standard Time. There's many more comments. There's lots of thanks. Thank you all for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.